Today's gospel starts with Jesus appointing 72 disciples. Back in the time of the Lord, it was considered there were 72 nations. So every single apostle to be assigned to a concrete nation to evangelize, to bring the good news. We can see that already in those early days, the church had a structure, kahal in Hebrew, meaning an assembly. And although Jesus was traveling up and down from Galilee to Judea with his apostles, he was already creating what's called a structure of the church. Look at it from this perspective. Oftentimes we hear there were 12, the closest. But even from among those 12, there were 3 who enjoyed, we may say, a closer insight into Jesus when, for example, he called Peter, James, and John up the high mountain where he transfigured himself. And we know that Peter was the prince of the apostles. Apart from those 12, there were another 72 that we heard about in today's gospel, then the disciples, and then the crowd. So a larger circle. Now, Luke, the apostle, was not one of the 12, although he's the author of one of the 4 gospels. He was not even one of the 3 closest one. It's considered he was a part of one of those 72 disciples. And knowing that makes us think that we don't have in the canon of sacred books in the scriptures the Gospel of Peter. We don't have the Gospel of Bartholomew or of Judas, although some of them are in the apocryphal writings, which means were circulating in the early church but never ended up in what's called the canon. What I would like to say by that is that Luke, from the place and the perspective that he was at, which means one of the 72 and not one of the 3 close ones, recounts the experience of Jesus Christ as it was given to him, as he received it from the closest disciples to Jesus, as the witnesses who enjoyed a closer relationship with the Lord had, and then conveyed it to him, and he wrote the gospel down. He could have said, look at this, I'm not even going to start writing. I'm not Matthew, I'm not John. Why should I even make an attempt? I'm not one of the closest. So why should I even start writing? But the Holy Spirit inspired him to do it, which shows an important spiritual truth, which is where he was put by God, meaning in the group of one of those 72, he accepted this position, this role, he embraced it, he loved it, and from where he was at, he was writing the gospel as a witness of Christ's love and his working. No one may say, I have nothing to say about Jesus. I'm not Padre Pio. I'm not Mother Teresa. I'm not John Paul II. I'm not one of those great mystics who enjoyed such a great intimacy and friendship with Jesus Christ, like even Saint Faustina. So who am I? Just a small, insignificant individual in the huge church that I belong to. No, everyone has one's own role. Maybe you are not, and knowing you, you are not Padre Pio, and you are not St. Catherine of Siena, but you are who you are, called to this intimate relationship with Jesus Christ, and from your perspective and the place God assigned you, are called to narrate the experience of Christ's love in your life to others, meaning you are writing the gospel with your life in the lives of the people He's sending you to. He's commissioning you to go and give what you have received. We need to be also aware that, number one, we don't downplay this aspect of being called by the Lord and then bearing the treasure, bearing this great talent of Christ's teaching that was given to us. St. Paul is another example, who was not one of the 12, was not one of the 72. He was the persecutor of the Christians, as you know very well. And then he was called by the Lord on the way to Damascus. He converted, and then he became such a prolific and fruitful apostle that hardly any other disciples made an impact as he did. But what is of value for us is, number one, welcoming the calling that the Lord bestows upon us. And as we need to also realize, from the very beginning, the church, namely the members that were called by the Lord, were not perfect, had issues, imperfections. And in the first reading, St. Paul specified that some of them did him harm. He says, Demas, enamored of the present world, deserted me and went to Thessalonica. Then others who did him harm, who left him. Alexander the coppersmith did me a great deal of harm. The Lord will repay him according to his deeds. But wait a minute. Didn't Paul dedicate his life to Jesus, and he should have had a path nicely paved in front of him in his endeavors? No. He was battling, he was struggling, he was confronted with the disciples who fell away, who drifted away, who were actually evangelizing out of envy and trying to get their own profit. Now, what it all tells us, that regardless of the circumstances, particularly in our church, you may get different news and information about the scandals. And please remember, as even Pope Francis says, that one tree of the forest that falls down and makes a noise is more important and draws attention rather than another 1,000 trees that are there rooted and providing oxygen. Meaning, yes, there are those who fall away, there are those who are Judas, there are those who deny Jesus, who make mistakes, but this fact does not prevent us from believing that Jesus Christ is present in the church, in his word, in the sacraments. And I had a personal experience that those I expected to be close and support me deserted me, not because they were of evil intent or they had wrong intentions, but basically the way I see it from the faith perspective, God allowed it so that to a certain extent I would also have an experience as St. Paul, that people deserted me. I hope I would receive some support and some word of comfort, but I found myself alone in a concrete, specific situation of my ministry. But St. Paul did not say, well, woe to you, curse be upon you, you are traitors. No, he didn't say that. The contrary. He says, at my first defense, no one appeared on my behalf, but everybody deserted me. We don't like that word. May it not be held against them. You see how St. Paul speaks? But the Lord stood by me and gave me strength. That's the critical, central word. The Lord stood by me and gave me strength. Oftentimes, those events when others desert us, disappoint us, move away, instead of grumbling, saying, look, what disciples or what followers of Christ, how come they treated me like that? We should say, now I have a chance of leaning on the Lord, embracing him, asking for his strength, And the Lord, knowing that we are alone and have nowhere to lean on, will come, assist, uphold, and sustain us and make himself present to us. Many times talking to other priests and missionaries, they told me, in the moments of greatest desolation, when it seemed that no one really cared and I felt abandoned, I had a closest, intimate relationship with Jesus Christ, one-on-one through the scriptures, through the adoration, right there and then. In my own place that is assigned to me by God. Maybe you will be forgotten, but not by God. Maybe you will not be taken into account, but God sees where you stand, and what he asks of us is one word: to be faithful and not successful. And even if God reaches one person through our life so that this good news and proclamation may take place, that's already a huge thing. To conclude, Saint Padre Pio said, writing in one of his spiritual daughters, if you only knew the value of one soul in front of God, you would not complain how hard it is for you.